Good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the Mesa City Council study session for the morning of January 6, 2022. Welcome back from our little Christmas time off. I'll note for the record that all of our council are present for this meeting. The first item on our agenda is to review the agenda that we have for Monday's council meeting. So let's go through that agenda. Mr. Brady, I know you do have some presentations from staff, I think maybe just on the zoning case, right? But
yes, Mayor, on the power food truck, and actually it's agendized.
yes, it's separately agendized for this meeting.
So whenever the council would like to hear more from that, we can explain all that too. So on this agenda that you're reviewing for Monday, it's set for introduction. But we wanted to make sure council also saw what staff is working on as relates to the development agreement, which has that kind of outlines all the discussions about the conditions of trying to address noise and parking and a variety of issues. But we can talk about that in that particular item.
So we will receive a staff presentation on that item for Monday, but other items on the agenda. Mr. Heredia.
Is there more information on the 5D, the contract outdoor cellular network? Is there a presentation on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of us were looking forward to hearing more about that. Trevor, welcome. Good to see you. I know thanks, Travis. Can we hear Travis? Talk.
I am.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, he's got to say something first.
I said good morning. I started to say Happy New Year, but it wasn't working, and I didn't want to waste all that, until you could hear me. So, good morning and Happy New Year, Mayor and Council. 5D. So this is our part of the bigger plan to help bridge the digital divide, and this particular one we presented to you a few months back, and it's the private cellular network that we're going to deploy in a 10 square mile area of the underserved part of the city of Mesa. And so we're partnering with Motorola to help us install these towers, and then we've got these routers that we will be able to deploy to the families that are underserved in that particular area that's covered, and they'd be able to get access to high-speed broadband.
So, Mayor and Council, if you recall, we started this some time ago with the map that Travis had that showed kind of the areas where the school district identified they were lacking service during the time that they were working remotely, going to school remotely. So the plan is to set this network up. And then we are also in discussions with the school district about deploying the routers so that they can be responsible for making sure that the routers get in the hands of the children that are going to school in that area. That's kind of our first kind of initiative, I guess, with this program, is to make the routers available through the schools to the students who live in this, it's Kleiman Park, what's the boundaries again, do you recall? We can get that map for you by Monday, yeah. So, but this is the beginning of that, and so we're excited because this would give connectivity to a lot of residents who right now, at least based on the information we had from the school district, didn't have broadband access before.
Mr. Ruddy, are you done?
Yeah, just a question around, I know I asked around kind of customer service, if routers are not working, like what's the process or the internal process where we're helping individuals out with those issues?
So we recognize that we'll be getting some calls, and we've got an internal help desk, but the hope is, and as Mr. Brady said, we're partnering with the school district that's going to be distributing hopefully the routers to the students and that, and so this would be a joint effort to where if there's an issue with the router, the school help line would assist with that, and then if they need additional help, we would help. But there's always an option for them to call our internal help desk as well, and of course my staff is trained on these devices and how to resolve issues.
Oh, well.
Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Travis. We met and you brought the router to me. I thought that was really cool, small little device. So my understanding, the way it will work, it'll go to the Title I schools within that area. The students will be assigned the router based on whether they're Title I students. And since we've deployed devices to all the schools, so we won't need to provide them a computer. The school's already going to provide them the computer. They'll take that computer home and they'll be able to access the router that we're going to be providing along with the school district. And that's how they'll access their homework.
Right, yeah, and some of the devices that were deployed in the past, if you remember, there was a contract with Verizon that came with a monthly fee and this and that. And so this private cellular will do away with those fees now, and so you can take those devices and
Right.
they can connect to the router that is distributed to them and connect to the broadband.
And through our CARES funding, we were able to provide devices to most of those kids in the
Yes.
Title I schools. So there shouldn't be an issue relative to the device, and I'm sure the school district has backup. In fact, the mayor and I attended a device handout over at one of our elementary schools.
So, Mayor and Council, we
2 years ago?
still have more to work with on the school district to get all these details worked out. As a matter of fact, we talk about it a little bit later, we've scheduled a joint meeting between Mesa Public Schools Board and the City Council. And part of that agenda is to present this concept. We've been working at the staff level, but we want to get it to the board level. So we're going to present all of this to them in that meeting also.
Okay.
So this is still being developed on their side, but we have the opportunity to acquire the equipment and put up the network. And beyond schools, there's going to be more, we think there's more opportunities beyond just school kids. That's where we want to start, but we think there's opportunities with nonprofits, maybe populations that are experiencing homelessness. So I think there's some opportunities beyond just the schools, but we're going to start with the schools first.
Well, I like the idea. Maybe Natalie's probably more familiar with working with A New Leaf and,
Yep.
our shelters, because I believe they provide learning opportunities there, and having the devices as well as a router would be beneficial for them as well.
You bring up a great point with regards to the digital divide, and it's broadband's a piece of it, but then also the actual devices that they use is another piece, and we're working with a local company, and it has to do with the climate action plan, but devices that we have surplus, what we want to do is take those, and there's a local company right down the road that refurbishes those, and so then they will make them available to lower income folks and that. And so I was, so that's something else we're working on. I hadn't put it all together yet, but that's definitely another piece of it for sure.
So that was my question, was whether this was only accessible through these routers or if we were going to open it up to other people. So I could look.
Yeah, I
for
think our
exploring
first
that.
deployment was focused on the school district. I think once we get that, that'll give us a lot of experience. Then we've talked about rolling this out. I mean, everything that's just been discussed here is the possibility of nonprofits, especially in this particular area that we're activating. We'll look for other nonprofits and other groups that could benefit from this also.
So I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but with the devices, you can't put any kind of filters on them. And so do you know if this network has any kind of, can they get filter services or anything like that?
So the antivirus and that sort of thing is going to be the responsibility of the end user. We're providing access to the internet like we do today with at Mesa. And so although we do filter some sites with at Mesa, we're not necessarily putting out anti-spam and antivirus type software on the end devices unless it's a device that we deployed, like meaning the laptops and that sort of thing. So that's really the responsibility of the end user. And I don't know if we'd be able to support a model to where.
I know, it's a hard issue, but we've spent millions of dollars putting these devices into these kids' hands, and then I think we need to put pressure on the district to make them be safe for all these kids, because
Absolutely.
we're spending all of this money to help them, and it is a huge help, but it's also putting a weapon in their hands that can cause a lot of harm if not, watched over. And so I think we need to have that discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
Great point.
Thanks.
Vice Mayor.
I have just a few questions. I really love the program. We're allocating $4.5 million for this. So that is the cost for the routers that you spoke about. But are we working on an existing network? Do we have to install more towers, equipments, or receptors? I mean, and I know we'll have to have personnel to implement this, but just kind of get an overview of what's necessary. And part two of the question is, when do we think it would be in effect?
Okay. Mayor and Vice Mayor Duff, again, great questions. So actually, the lion's share of this money is to put up the antennas and the towers that the antennas go on. That's the most expensive part of it. That's the actual infrastructure that these routers connect to. The routers are probably about 10 to 15% of the total cost.
So just quickly, Mayor and Council, the model that we're proposing to the school district, so I'm trying to be careful not to get too ahead of them, is we're going to install the major infrastructure, correct? We're going to create this cellular network by putting the antennas on these, the poles that are around the city. And then what we're going to propose to the school district is, okay, the network is standing there, it's ready. Here's the compatibility. You go purchase the routers and you distribute the routers. You be responsible for the accountability, who's getting that router and whether it got turned in at the end of the year or whatever. So that way we've kind of picked up we've done the major infrastructure. Think about we're doing the infrastructure and now they're taking care of the specific router device that's in the home that would normally be checked out to an individual and be responsible. We think that accountability is better between the school district and the student and the parent. But we're going to say, we're going to provide the mesh of the broadband, and then you can connect into it. Now, that's how we think it should work with the school district. We need to finalize all that. And then, but when we get into maybe the nonprofits and other things, maybe that's something where we could actually acquire the routers and the devices, but we haven't got there yet. We want to this is acquiring the equipment to allow us to create the cellular network to attach on the poles around the city. One of them is pretty close to PAWS, as we recall. So there'll be quite very good coverage, I suspect, by PAWS. So we could work with them eventually too. You know, they could have laptops and routers that, you know, could be available for training or job search or other kinds of resources. But more to come. We're trying to focus on the school portion of this first and then expand from there. But this is just the big lift. This is buying the equipment to install on the towers.
Yes. And we've got a partnership with the current vendor that we use for our radio towers now, and they're going to be that's who we're procuring the equipment through, and that's who will be installing it and supporting it for us, although, you know, there will be some support required on my team as well, and we're aware of that, and we're just going to watch it and kind of see how it goes. We think we've got staff in place because we function fairly efficiently and we'll be able to support what we're deploying, but, you know, to the extent that this works great and we want to expand it further into the city, you know, we may have a conversation at that point about how we support a much larger footprint.
Is there an ongoing cost to the city to support the cellular network to the schools, or is it something we already have available?
So the equipment comes with support, maintenance support, but any equipment that we roll out will it'll have a warranty, and then after that warranty, we decide if we want to buy additional, kind of like your car, if you want to buy an extended warranty and that sort of thing. So if something happens, or another approach would be buy additional equipment to have as spare, and then if something fails, you can swap it out. And
But as far as the bandwidth, is there an ongoing cost for the city?
No, not the bandwidth. No,
Okay.
it's and that's the beauty of this network is we own that infrastructure and the wavelength that everything's running over, and so we don't have to pay other providers to access it.
This is exciting. So when do you think it would be up and running?
So we committed to Mayor and Mr. Brady that we would have it up and running before the start of the next school year, and so that's been our target, and we believe we're going to be able to accomplish that. So,
Fall of '22, something like that?
Yeah, next fall, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
August. Not the fall.
August, yeah.
Come on.
We'll start
you know,
Normal schools,
normal schools.
The
the rest of the country,
Yeah.
Labor Day.
And do you have an estimate of how many users will be able, that you're trying to accommodate?
so this first wave, and so the more users you put on it, the slower the network will become. So what we can support at very high speeds is like 2,000 users. So
Great, thank you.
That was, I guess, my question too, is the capacity. And can you compare and contrast what we're doing to the at Mesa, capability that we have in downtown? Because I just pulled up my cell phone and at Mesa is available to me as I sit here in downtown. But is it the same? Or how is it different?
at Mesa, that technology is a lot faster. And what you're seeing right now is actually throttled back to, you hear these numbers of 100 megabits, and that's at Mesa, when you connect right now, you're connecting at maximum 10 megabits, but we're going to throttle that up to 100. It's just throttled right now. And so bandwidth capability is more with the Wi-Fi access points that we've got deployed, but the
So Travis, you're using different technology, right?
it's completely different
So that
technology.
this is cellular technology running off of antennas coming off of poles. At Mesa is running with fiber.
Yeah, fiber to the wireless hotspots.
So it's a different technology.
Right.
So.
But, however, we're also expanding, and there'll be something else coming before you in the not-so-distant future. Is the other piece to this is expanding the at Mesa. And so as we expand at Mesa, there's going to be some overlap with this private cellular area. And so those routers that are being deployed to the students, it will be able to go out and sense the faster speed. And so if it can get to at Mesa and it's a faster speed, it'll connect to that. If it can get to the private cellular and that's the faster speed, it'll connect to that. And so these are kind of dual.
Cellular is the least intrusive because we can put antennas on poles. We're not having to run fiber through conduit in streets. Now, eventually, you're going to have a presentation later this month about a citywide possibility of working on a citywide deployment of fiber, but really this one was, because it's coming out of ARPA funding, it fit one of the strategic initiatives in ARPA to help close the digital gap, provide broadband in low-income areas with the experienced didn't have connectivity during the pandemic, and so that's what we're responding to with this. But there's more to come about fiber and running it through the whole city. We'll have those discussions here in the next couple of weeks.
And Mayor, as you saw when we were out at the park, how the response time on the private cellular was, if you didn't know you were connected to private cellular versus at Mesa, you wouldn't notice the response time. It's more than sufficient to do videos and homework and pretty much anything you need to do in that. It's just a technology, as our city manager mentioned, that we can deploy quickly in the areas that we couldn't necessarily get to with the access points that need fiber connection and that.
Yeah, this is a great step towards, I think, a goal that we have to have ubiquitous Wi-Fi throughout our city, to treat this technology as a utility, because it really is essential for people to function in today's age. So thank you. It'll be an interesting journey as we learn more about this and figure out how to do it. I'll, if you don't mind, I'll tell a very quick story. During the pandemic, I was at a food distribution event at one of our elementary schools, a short distance from downtown Mesa. And it was a great food distribution event. The cars were lined up and the families were all very anxious and grateful for the food assistance. But a lot of them were all at the same time saying, thank you for the food. But another one of the real reasons we're here is we need to pick up the packets for our kids. I've got a third grader and a fourth grader, and the principal was running, the copy machine in the office. It was smoking, because he had to deliver all these packets to third graders and fourth graders because they'd shifted to an online curriculum. And for these families, that meant they were excluded from participating in education. So the digital divide, that was an aha moment for me where I realized this digital divide is very real, and it's right here in downtown Mesa. So I think this is an important step towards addressing that concern. So thank you for the hard work that's gone into this. Other questions regarding, yes, Mr. Luna?
I guess this is for Andrew. It's sort of a silly question, but it's about the bee removal.
The what?
What agenda item is that?
I'm sorry, it's 5C?
Oh, the bees and stinging
Yeah.
insects?
I can try to remove the bees.
No.
I'll focus on the cellular.
I can see some beehives on some of these
Yeah.
towers.
That's how we're connecting to the home. It's the beehive. Yeah. So Andrea, when we hire a company to remove bees, they're not killing them, they're taking them somewhere else, is that correct?
It depends on the situation. So we are trying to work on relocation, but that's not always possible. It is unique to where they are, what time of day it is, who is able to respond at that particular time, what kind of capacity they have.
Yeah, well, that's just concerning because, we need bees
Right.
to pollinate our plants.
We have quite a few Africanized bees, though.
80%, see?
They're very aggressive. Some of those hives are, so it depends on which type of bee it is as well.
So when this company, do they really enforce that? Do they reinforce removal of bees and taking them to a place, or do they?
They are working with us for relocation when it's an appropriate situation. So yes, they are working with us, but a lot of times, because the bees are so aggressive, we are having to remove them, not relocate them.
Okay. Anyway, that was my concern about the bees. Thank you.
Bees on other people's property are a good thing. Okay, thank you.
Well, Mayor, I might just add, 80% of our world crops are pollinated by bees, and so they're very important. So yeah, if we don't have to euthanize them, that would be great. But however, there are times when fire and others do have to put them down.
All right, council, other questions regarding Monday's agenda? Mr. Thompson?
I guess mine's more of a rant than a question. 7A, so I didn't realize that we were changing speed limits or establishing speed limits until I read through the agenda. And it causes some issues because I get questions from our residents as to why we're doing and what we're doing, and I have no response for them. And being given a heads up that speed limits are changing gives me an opportunity to get out in front of this. I asked the residents in Eastmark. I'm not so much concerned about Warner, west of Ellsworth, I get that. But inside Eastmark, they're changing the speed limit, dropping it to 35. And I asked the community their thoughts on it yesterday when I noticed this. And it was all over the place, from where's the traffic studies, why are you doing this, what's the need, to why are you doing this. And some people supported it, obviously, to slow traffic down. But one of the comments that really kind of struck home is, why are we changing speed limits and putting in stop signs if nobody's enforcing the laws? And I have issues when our citizens are responding that way, as to, why are we putting in speed limit signs if we're not going to enforce it? I was on Ray Road down in Eastmark doing 45 miles an hour, and I got passed in a school zone like I was parked on the side of the road. And there's no enforcement. There's zero enforcement out there. Same thing on Eastmark Parkway around Basis and the schools there. Kids are going out into the crosswalk thinking it's safe, almost getting hit. Parents are doing the exact same thing. And so if we're not going to enforce the laws that we have on the books, then let's stop changing laws and putting in speed limit signs and stop signs. Because if people aren't paying attention to them and we're not going to educate or ticket, then what are we doing? So that's my rant for the day. Thank you.
Okay. So 7A is on for introduction, so if other folks want to come and rant about the speed limit being changed, they'll have the opportunity to do that twice, on Monday and then after the following meeting after that. And this does look like it went through the Transportation Advisory Board, so I imagine staff can tell us about the process that was gone through to make that recommendation. Either Monday or a couple weeks from Monday. Speaking of that, RJ, tell us how we go about recommending the change of speed limits.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. RJ Zeter with the Transportation Department. Our staff, analyze how the road is designed. There are a number of criteria which I'd have to bring people smarter than me to explain to you exactly how it works. We do run all of our, as you pointed out, Mayor, all of our recommendations for speed limit changes through the Transportation Advisory Board before it comes to council. We can certainly let the individual council members know if we're recommending a change within their district. That's an easy add to the process. That's not hard at all. So Councilmember Thompson and I talked quite a bit about traffic issues in District 6 specifically. A lot of it has to do with the growth in that area, which we all know is explosive. Eastmark Parkway specifically, I know that Councilmember Thompson asked if we could look at putting up a beacon of some kind at Kinetic and Eastmark Parkway. So we are evaluating that specifically because, kids and others cross the street there. There are school crossings, but obviously that's only during school hours when the speed limits are dropped down to 15 miles an hour, through the school crossings. But I take your question, Councilmember, that we're talking more than just school hours. It's all times during the day. So there are specific things. We do use photo safety money. That is one of the places that those dollars go. And it's a good use of those dollars. We have, I could provide a list of the projects we've done or projects we've got upcoming, but that's a great use. Ray Road specifically, I guess we can certainly take a look there. It's kind of open there, I guess, still, right now, depending on where you're at. And we work very closely with our police department as well.
And John, got a question for you, if you don't mind. So, the thing that irritates me the most is the speeders that go through our school zones. What can we do about that when it comes to, I'm not a big proponent of photo radar, but in school zones, I'm 100% a proponent of photo radar. So what can we do to slow the traffic in these school zones?
Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, we will look at this area to look if it's appropriate for photo safety for the school zones. That is one of the areas, school zones, where I get no questions from council about putting photo safety. And actually, Mesa Public Schools generally asks us to review these areas and Gilbert Public Schools for photo safety. So we will take a look at these areas. We are also talking about Mesa Public Schools. One of the big complaints is the safety of crossing guards. So we are talking to Mesa Public Schools and to Vera Mobility about getting some portable things to help protect our crossing guards so that we don't have people blowing by them without any ramifications. I'd love to tell you that I could talk to Chief Koss and we could make these a priority for traffic, but as you know, the city is huge and getting officers out to there is not easy. Right. So we will look at photo safety in these areas to make sure that we're protecting our citizens.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Council, other questions on Monday's agenda? Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, are we going to have a presentation on CAFRA?
Yeah, we're ready. When council wants to do that.
Okay. That's,
Nine.
Love to hear from Irma.
is that separately agendized for the study session?
No.
Okay, so.
It's just not on consent. It's item.
Oh, it's not on consent. Yeah, right. So thank you, Mr. Freeman. So we know we have to, by state law, Mr. Brady, we have to have a presentation on the CAFR, which is, should we get a preview of that?
Yes, we'd like to do that. She's ready.
Okay, thank you. Irma, please come up and tell us.
And we
about
have our auditor with us,
Yeah.
so you'll hear from them today. And then it's posted for, as you can see, obviously, it's posted for Monday, so will be a separate presentation again during the council meeting upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Welcome. We all, every year, look forward to getting the CAFR. So thanks for rolling it out.
Yeah, good morning, Mayor, Council. We do. Get this started. Okay, oops, let me go back. Sorry. So with me today is Sandy Comstrom. She is a principal with Clifton Larson Allen, CLA. Her firm is the one that did the audit. And as Mr. Beatty mentioned, and Mayor, we are required now to have the auditor present the results of our financial statements, our audit, specifically to speak to the audit opinion. We will have a shorter version of this Monday evening at the regular council meeting, since it is an item off consent.
Good morning. I'm Sandy Cronstrom. I am the principal in charge of the city's audit. We're hired to come out and do your financial statement audit. We also audit your HERF funds. We do a compliance audit of that. We do some HUD agreed upon procedures for you. We look at your expenditure limitation report. And we also do the city's single audit, which is the federal compliance piece of the audit. Back in December, we wrapped up the financial statement piece of the audit and the HERF compliance. We're working through the federal compliance, a single audit right now. We're going to be back out on site here in the next couple weeks to wrap that up. We were waiting on some compliance regulations that came out kind of late in the game, so we kind of held off on that part. We're going to be selecting 4 of your programs for testing this year, which is more than normal due to the COVID funding. Those funds are considered when we're looking at risk and figuring out which programs we need to test. Those are considered high risk by the federal government. So we'll be looking at those programs as well. So when we finished up the CAFR audit back in December, we issued an unmodified opinion. We did not have any material findings, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies on the financial statement side of things. The city is following generally accepted accounting principles and has implemented all applicable government accounting standard board statements. So I'd be willing to answer any questions, or I guess Irma's got a presentation to get into a little more depth. She's going to get into the numbers piece of it for you.
We just clarify for council, because we use the word HERF. I don't know if the council has heard that word before. So
Highway users.
The highway user revenue, yes.
So we get that from the state, and that has to be audited separately too. So I want to make sure. Sometimes we throw out a lot of acronyms. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah. And we had no findings related to that either.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go on a high level results of our financial highlights for the year. Fiscal year 21 was a great year for us. City revenues increased by $113.2 million. That's both on the governmental funds and in the utility funds. The major increases related to the federal funds that we received, that was about $30 million. Also, our increase in our sales tax revenue was about $33.9 million. And then on the governmental side, the general fund had the new in lieu franchise tax revenue that it collected, and that was new for this year. And on the utilities, they also had an increase in their charges for services. The next slide kind of breaks down on the governmental activities, the different components. Here you can see the increase in the taxes. On this slide, this includes both sales tax and property tax. The unrestricted revenues, those are mainly the shared revenues, state shared revenues, which is our urban revenue sharing, our state sales tax shared, our highway user tax, and also the vehicle tax. And then in the transfers, those decreased a little bit, and that was expected because with the new ordinance, thank you. There's a formula that we go through now to determine the amount of the transfer from the utility funds to the general fund. And then the program revenues increase, and that's where the majority of the federal funds are. This is a snapshot of the assets. As of June 30th of 21, our total assets were $4.9 billion. The largest component of that is our capital assets, which is our infrastructure, our buildings, our water infrastructure. And then the next component of them, the next large component is our cash and investments. Both of those increased between 20 and 21.
Irma, what's an example of other assets? I
Other
get,
assets, the biggest component that is, I keep hitting that wrong slide, I apologize. The biggest component in other assets is our investments in the joint ventures. So we participate in SHROG, this sub-regional operating group with Val Vista, Greenfield Water Treatment Plant, and Val Vista. So that is our equity share of those joint venture assets. That's the biggest component of other assets. Beyond that is like accounts receivable, so those are pretty small.
SHROG would be the assets that are located in Phoenix.
Yes. Oh, and that also includes our equity interest in Val Vista,
Yeah.
Valley Metro.
Oh,
I forgot, that's a big one as well.
yeah.
This is just kind of where our cash and investments were at the end of the year. I won't go through all of them, but I'll just highlight some of them. The cash, the 71 million, that's really what we had in our operating fund, and with Chase is who we use. The 140 million, we participate in, well, as of June 30th, 2020, when we were in 4 different state treasurer pools that we participated in as an investment option. The 156 million, that's cash with trustees and fiscal agents. That's 2 components. The cash with fiscal agent is the funds that we have already provided to UMB, who's our fiscal agent, for the debt payment that we make on July 1st. We provide that to them before the end of the year, so they have it, so that our bond holders can have their payment. And the cash with trustees was about 36 million, and those are the bond proceeds from our excise tax obligations. When we issued the excise tax obligations for the Mesa City Center, those went to a trustee, and we spent the funds, and then we request reimbursement. So there was about 36 million still left in that fund. And then the largest component is long-term investments. That's a combination of funds that our third-party PFM Asset Management Group invest for us, and then also our city treasurer who also invests for us. And those could be corporate bonds or U.S. treasuries that we're investing in. And even, I'll point out that even though it says long-term investments, they're all liquidating time, and we can sell them and if we needed those funds.
And all compliant with the state investment.
It's
rules.
compliant with our city investment policy and with the state statute. It's a high level of our liabilities at the end of the year. The 2 larger components are our pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities, and also our long-term obligations, which is our bonds that are outstanding. I have 2 slides that will follow. They'll give each of those a little bit of breakdown.
Is PRS combined with state retirement under the pension portion?
Yes, it is. And I think in 2 slides, it'll be a breakdown. I'll show you a breakdown of what's ASRS, what's PSPRS for fire, what's PSPRS for PD, and then our city's other post-employment benefit plan. So this is just the long-term obligations. Our general obligation bonds decreased slightly. Our highway user revenue bonds also decreased. We use a lot of our highway user revenue sales tax or revenue funds to pay that debt. Our utility revenue bonds increased, and then last year was the first year that we did the utility revenue obligations. It was a kind of a pilot for us. And then the excise tax obligations are also new this year, and again, that is for the Mesa City Center ASU building. Okay. And then here is the pension and OPEB unfunded liability. All of them increased this year. ASRS pension, that would be for the non-sworn employees. And then we have the PSPRS fire pension and the PSPRS police pension. We also record the PSPRS police OPEB. PSPRS also offers other post-employment benefits to both fire and police. The police one is more material, so that one we record. The fire one is not material, and we don't record that, and the auditors agree with us. And then the city OPEB plan, that is for all our eligible retirees who were hired before 2009. They get the medical and benefits when they retire. And that one increased really because of the change in the treasury rate. We have an actual analysis done every 2 years on that plan. The last time we had it done was in fiscal year 20. In 21, we did not have one, but they're required to do a present value calculation based on the rate, and the rate changed, and so that increased our liability.
I know we've talked in the past about increasing our contributions per the state law to retire.
And we are.
Why then is the amount continuing to grow?
It's a combination of different factors, the assumptions that are used, assumptions on the payroll growth, assumptions on the investment returns.
They just made an adjustment on, was it their investment return and age?
Yes.
Recently, so that might have had an effect. But we are contributing much more than the minimum requirement, and we had, I can't remember the amount. Is Sam here? I don't see Sam. Who? I know, but how much more than what the minimum? We can bring that to you, Mayor. We are trying to be very aggressive, and over a period of time, increasing that. And I can't remember when there's a time frame where we think that we'll be in a position where it'll start dropping down. It's a significant amount, so we had to kind of ramp up from what our minimum amount was, and we're significantly increasing that. And I can't remember what the amount is, but we've got that presentation before. We'll bring it back, Mayor.
Yeah, I've seen projections in the past that shows that after 20 years or whatever,
There is a
that's
period.
why I'm just surprised
Yeah.
that it doesn't seem like we're.
I know, because the estimate is at some point we have to get over the peak so we can start drawing it down. And I can't remember when that date is. I think it's a few more days out. Oh,
Yes.
Brian, go ahead.
Mayor, City Council, the previous amount was about 64 million. We upped it to 78 million. And a few months ago, Sam Schultz made a presentation to where if we stay constant with that 78 million in about 5 years, we would be above what we need to be and we would start seeing some savings.
It's a big hole we're coming out of, so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And that is a presentation for another day. But
Yeah,
it's-
if we go into the budget, as we kind of present that to you at the beginning of every budget year, kind of talk about that. So we'll probably see that in February, March, yeah.
Okay. I also wanted to talk about a new accounting standard that we will be implementing this fiscal year 22. I normally don't present when we have new accounting standards, but this one may have a significant impact on our financial statements. Currently, the leases that we have where we are both the lessor or the lessee, we make the payment on an annual basis or monthly basis, or we receive payments, and everything is that current year. What the standard is going to require to put all those future payments that we will be receiving as the lessor on our books as an asset. And right to use asset, and then when we are the lessee, all those future payments that we're going to make, they'll require us to put that on our books as well as a deferred inflow of resources. Most of what we have are, we are the lessor. If you think about it, everything at Falcon Field, there's a lot, the hangar leases and that kind of stuff, or anything from real estate for buildings. And so most of these, we are the lessee, and we've been working with the departments for the last year to get all of their agreements so that we have all the information that we need so that we can record this. It's a big task and a big item, and we've actually hired consultants to help us with this calculation. But that'll change, so next year when I come and talk to you, there'll be new numbers on there, so I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that was coming. And that's all I have, unless you have any more questions.
Vice Mayor.
So on the new accounting standards, I know I've been told, because we had a meeting on this, but if you could remind me, how are those, is that a state or who decides?
The Government Accounting Standards Board is
Okay.
the one that decides. And so they are they set all the accounting standards for all governments that have to follow. State, local municipalities, all have to follow those.
There's some amorphous group that sits somewhere we don't know where, and they make the rules that come down on cities.
In Virginia, I
Don't-
believe.
They hardly make sense, so.
So this is a national,
Yeah.
Yes.
all cities,
Yes.
All cities.
organizations.
And just as further information, there's also FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and they're the ones that regulate it for-profit and public companies. They set these standards for their entities, for the public companies several years ago. It took a long time because everyone fought it, but it's here to stay now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Freeman.
Irma, I saw in Sunday's paper there was a discussion about investment in state pools, investment pools. And so you mentioned on slide 6 some of our monies might be in there.
As of June 30th, there were. Since then, we've started to pull out of them. So we have very little in there now. I think we only have, thank you, Mary Kay, 400,000. From the, what was it in that previous?
Well, while you look it up, there was some
We're
concern.
140.
There was some concern about the investment portfolios and some of the state investment funds, and so
We
there's,
pulled it out because at this point, we were starting to lose money instead of making money.
that was part of the
Yes,
point.
and so that's why we quickly pulled out of those.
Yeah, and there's also been in the paper about the state issuing or serving as the issuer of bonds, the industrial, what do they call it, industrial revenue? I don't have the right name. And that's a different issue than investing the dollars to get a return. There's two stories going on out there. I think the one I'm seeing a lot of attention getting to is this authority that the state has to.
Is it IDA?
Yes, that's it, IDA, not okay. To issue bonds for entities that are not in Arizona.
Yeah, that
And that
was,
riskiness, that
That's
doesn't have
separate.
anything to do with this.
well, regardless, it talked about the riskiness of some of those investment portfolios, and they were out of state, out of country, and people didn't know really where the monies were going, and then some of the bonds they default on, so it wasn't
Right.
really good for the
This is-
end user, the investment.
Yeah, this
person.
is a different, these pools are pools the treasurer of the state oversees.
Yes, and they're investing them in treasuries or corporate bonds, but they can also invest them in other items. But as the interest rates are changing, we started noticing that our returns on those investments was lower, or we were actually starting to lose money, so we pulled out of them. And like I said, now we only have 400,000 of that 140 million, so we pulled up pretty quickly.
Good. Well, this is a great thermometer for our city. I mean, your second slide says unmodified report issued, no material findings, we're in good health. You know, we have good returns on our monies, and so we're healthy as a city financially, so that's a good thing. So I appreciate all the work, and Sandy, and got to meet Sandy and talk about her dad, who is a teacher at Carson Junior High.
Carson Raiders.
Yeah, well, it's not that anymore. I think.
No, they changed the name.
Well.
We could still sing the fight song for you.
So
How many
anyway.
times have you done this for the city? Been involved with the city? I do.
Are you asking how old I
No.
am, Chris?
We're in good hands.
never
My point
ask
is,
that,
we're in
no.
good hands with a veteran who knows
Yeah.
knows the city books. That's really
Right.
what I wanted to make the point.
All right, well,
Wow.
thank you. This was a great presentation, and again, we'll see this on Monday as well, and maybe a slightly condensed version.
Yes, it'll be a condensed version of this.
All right. Thank you, Council. Any additional questions? Vice Mayor?
I don't have a question, but I just want to put it out there that in the report itself, there is a summary at the beginning. It gives an overview of what's going on in our city, and I think I was very excited to read it. I think it's a great overview of all of the things that we've been able to accomplish or what we're working on, and I really appreciated that. I thought it was well done and wanted to put it out there for any citizens who would like to take an interest over the overview of our financial situation and all the things, the developments and everything that we've been doing over the past year. Thank you.
I might just, there's 202 pages, Vice Mayor, if you really want to get in and read.
She was talking about the executive summary.
Just the
But if you
executive
wanna
summary,
really-
but yeah, I actually like financial and I did not read every single, but I viewed every page.
Well, very good. There's 202 of them.
Amen to that. If you want to be an informed critic of the city of Mesa, read the CAFR. Yeah. Because it's easy to, if you see, it's a big elephant. And if you focus on the tusks or the tail or you might not have the right perspective. So you have to read, the CAFR is a good way to really understand, get some perspective on how we're doing. And we're doing well. So thank you. Any other questions, Council, on our Monday's agenda?
Thank you, Sandy.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to agenda item 2A, which is a presentation on the city's current allocations and proposed disbursement of the American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Good morning, Mayor,
Welcome.
council members. My name is Mike Kennington. It's a pleasure for me to join Irma up here to present an update on the American Rescue Plan Act. As you may recall, we were up here in front of you in August of last year, and since then, staff has been developing these programs and projects and gaining more information on them. And so today I'd like to, with Irma, update or highlight some of the revisions to the allocations, the estimates that we've had, and Irma will kind of give an overview on the progress. This will kick off, and we've had some of the presentations on these projects before, but over the next several weeks, 4 or 5 of these projects will be presented to council more in depth. And so starting today after ours as well. So on the first slide, what I'd like to highlight on the first two columns, the original estimate and a revised estimate. The first item is the PD body scanner, and I'm going to highlight the ones that have changed in the allocation estimates. PD body scanner is adjusted from $159,000 to $189,000, and that is due to a revised estimate that we've received from the vendor on that. After that, there's the Mesa Family Advocacy Center renovation, and that's a new item we've added. We've been evaluating that building, the MFAC, the building, the Mesa Family Advocacy Center, and we've realized there's more needs than we anticipated, and so we've added that $2 million allocation from ARPA. The next item that is adjusted is the Food Distribution Center. We've adjusted that from $10 million, the original estimate, to $5 million. We're continually working with United Food Bank, and we're still developing that plan, and so that estimate has adjusted from $10 million to $5 million. Let's see, the next item is the Restaurant and Food Business Incubator on this next page. And that's a new item as well. As you may recall, that's the program or the project that Jeff brought to you and presented to you in October. He's working from the direction of council that you gave him, and he's continually working on that project, but that's a new $3 million estimate that we've added to the total allocation. And finally, the last project that has changed in their estimate is the homeless solution. Natalie, in fact, will bring that to you in the next week. She'll bring several projects, and she'll talk more in depth on that. And also, let me just go back to the MFAC project. We'll be talking to you about that next week as well in more detail. And so those two will be next week as well. So those changes, if you go to the next slide, those changes result in the last line, the unallocated funds, changing from $14.3 to $9.3 million of unallocated funds, totaling to our $105.5 million. So we're continually developing these programs and projects, and we'll continually come back to council to update those. Irma now is going to take over to talk about the expenses that we've incurred up to date on these projects.
Okay. We have been slow in spending the monies because these projects that we're doing are longer term, long projects, due diligence and planning, and we want to, these funds were different than the CARES funds. The CARES funds was get them out there as soon as you can and help. These are meant to be more of a long-term projects. So the ones that we've actually expended so far are the purchase of the ambulances. Those already came to council. I think it was in October. And there was 5 ambulances that were purchased. We've already received those, but there's still other things that go along with it that aren't just the ambulance. So, and then the energy commodity costs that we came to council, or I should say Ed came to council a few months ago to also talk about that. That's a credit that our customers are receiving to kind of bridge the gap for the increase in the cost of our energy commodity. And as of December about 20th is when these numbers were run, we had spent up $1.3 million on that. And then the Wi-Fi mobile broadband, there was a smaller project that started in July, but that will be ramping up, as you heard Travis today talking about the projects that he's working on. So those are what our expenditures have been to date. We also, for each of the projects, we have them in like 3 different buckets. In development, which means that the project is still, we're still doing due diligence, it's still in the planning, or we're still reviewing it to determine, does it make sense? Under review means that it has already come to Mr. Brady for his approval, or it has already come to council. And then project program underway means just that we've already started the project. It's not complete, but it's still underway. Let's see. Let me think if I want to hit on any of them.
Irma, can I just mention that,
Yes.
let's mention the premium pay for essential workers?
Yes.
That disbursement, the first year of that disbursement will take place this month?
Yes, January 31st.
31st?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a big portion of that 12.8 will be
Yes.
allocated then. So it shows it in development, but it's already been, we've already identified all those employees. So all employees will be getting it, but the essential workers as defined by the federal government will be receiving their portion from the ARPA dollars. All the rest of the employees will receive the $2,000, but it'll come out of the general fund. Yeah, I don't like making the decision about what's essential. As far as I'm concerned, if you're working for the city of Mesa, you must be essential. So as I explained to our public safety and our utility folks, they're essential because they show up to work. But if payroll doesn't show up, doesn't do much good. They're pretty essential too, so. Anyway, we're using the ARPA funds to help fund those who are eligible under that program. The rest will receive it through the general fund.
Well, a question on that, though. I mean, essential workers are getting the monies from the ARPA fund, so that's not coming out of the general fund.
Right.
So we're
Right.
saving money
Yeah,
that way.
yep, we're able to provide $2,000 to all employees, and a larger portion of that is coming from the ARPA.
And so every employee is essential. because of that.
Exactly,
All right,
exactly.
Thank you.
And that's all we had prepared today, Mayor and Council. Any questions?
So we just wanted to kind of give you we've kind of been bringing you these projects one at a time. We wanted you to see the whole picture. Now the next presentation, you'll start seeing, having departments come and talk about the specific programs. We'll be doing that through January. There's a lot of more programs we want to brief council on before we go and spend it. The projects you've heard, just because they're federal funds, there's the procurement process, whether it's a construction project or other types of services. Once we speak to you, then we start that process, and it could be some time before we're able to spend the money, just because of the processes of how we go out and solicit design teams or contractors takes some time under the federal process, but we are underway on all those projects we've presented to you.
Julie?
When do we have to spend this money by? We have a longer window.
Yes, all funds have to be encumbered by December 31st of 2034.
Oh.
24, sorry, not 30. Sorry, I didn't just give you 10 years, 24. But they have to be spent by 26.
Spent by 26.
Yeah,
Encumbered
so
by
you could have a
24.
construction project or a contract that we've entered in, that we've already encumbered the funds as of December of 24, and are not going to spend it for another year or so.
Okay.
And we're receiving another allocation. Is it in '24? Is that correct?
We're receiving our second half of the allocation in May. For this presentation purposes, we've already combined both those amounts, even though we haven't
okay.
received them. So the 105 allocation that was in the presentation is a total.
But
So
we've already received the 50.
we received the first half May of
right.
21, and we'll receive the second half May of 22.
So we're doing fine, yeah. Cash flow is fine.
Did we earn any interest on that 52 million?
Yes. We allocate interest to all our funds, or the majority, I should say.
Good, just checking.
Oh, yeah, we don't stuff it
And we
under
can
the
spend that
pillow.
money. Because sometimes you have to give it back when it's federal funds, but in this case, we can keep the interest earned.
So hopefully it's not invested with the state of Arizona is what we're saying. Sorry, that was a cheap shot. Thank you. I think I appreciate the update, and to me, this reflects the wisdom of the initial plan, which was to keep some funds in the unallocated, because we know that as we do deeper dives into this, that this is not, as Mr. Brady said, CARES Act. This is more long-term. This is more thoughtful, more deliberate, more impactful, and so it's not, the rush is not how fast can we get this money into the hands of the people in our community. It's how we need to be very good stewards, very deliberate, very thoughtful about how this gets spent. So I appreciate the approach.
And the good news is, Mayor, we'll provide more information in the update. We've spent over $30 million on utility and rental assistance, and we've just been allocated another $13 million. Does that make it the right number, right? $13 million of additional dollars. So
Where did that come from? I'm just curious.
it was a redistribution of dollars, which I think suggests that there are places that aren't spending it and places are spending it. The cities that are spending it are getting more dollars.
Yeah.
So that's why
So that's a nice pat on the back.
Oh, yeah.
People keep giving us money for rental and utility assistance because we have shown that we're good at it.
Yeah, over $30 million to date, so.
That's great. All right, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Next item 2B, is a presentation to provide direction on the proposed use of American Rescue Act funds for the Convention Center main hall flooring replacement and Youth Recreation Program Scholarship. Andrea, thank you for the great lapel pin.
Good morning.
You bet.
You're welcome. All right, so Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities is in queue to use ARPA funds for 2 different projects. The first one came out of using the main hall at the convention center for over a year for emergency operations. So it was food bank operations, and also the testing and vaccination sites all took place in the main hall there. That floor received pretty significant damage as a result of that, much different than trade shows and dinners that normally happen in there. And we found a need to redo the floor in there as a result. We looked at doing different repairs and top coating of that, but instead the primary treatment that seems to have the best effect is going to be a type of carpet product that will look and feel and dampen the sound a little bit in there, but more like a hardwood floor. But it's going to be a carpet product, so it's sustainable over the years instead of the stained concrete that's in there now. That project will be delivered through a cooperative contract, and so we're still working with 1GPA and the contractors that they have through that. It's the same flooring contract that we use for any flooring projects in the city. And we're looking at being able to do that installation depending on material deliveries in either mid-March or early June. The second one, the bigger one, is the scholarship program. Mesa Recreation Scholarship is what we're calling it, for youth participating in any of our programs, starting as soon as the spring season and going through 2023. So it's going to be, for those folks that are eligible, a 50% scholarship on our program fees. And that would apply to aquatics programs, so swim lessons, swim teams, dive team, flow rider lessons, any of our adaptive programs, our school break, spring break, fall break, summer break programs, camps, and our after-school programs. Lots of different youth sports options, tennis options, all of those types of activities that are open for our youth in our community. So there's two ways that folks could be eligible to receive this scholarship. One is going through an address verification. So we have the HUD data on where we have low income or moderate income census tracts throughout the city. And so people will be able to click on this link, put their address in there, and it'll come back and tell them if they're in a low or moderate income census tract, that would make them eligible for the scholarship. And so then they essentially get a membership code that is applied through our registration system through this address verification portal. And if folks are, we found in 2019, as an example, about 18% of all of our program participants would have resided within a low moderate income census tract. And so there are many more than that who have participated in requests for fee assistance from us in prior years. So there's a secondary way of qualifying for the scholarship, which is to fill out if they are not in one of those census tracts that are low or moderate income. They can put in a request for review, and if there's public assistance received by that household in the form of free and reduced lunch program, public assistance received, unemployment received, something that they can show us documentation that they're receiving public assistance, then that would also open up that scholarship code for them. And so we're looking to start that process this month so that people can start the process of qualifying for the scholarships. And then from this point through 2023, they would have access to that discount code.
Thank you. Councilmember Spilsbury and then Councilmember Luna.
This is all great. You say only 18% were in these low to moderate income areas. I'm guessing that's because you would have a lot more if they could afford it, right? So how do you get the word out to these schools and neighborhoods and families?
It was interesting last year that Mesa Public Schools offered scholarship to the students that were in their schools to our programs. And we had many different customers come forward as a result of that. And so we're planning to do a whole lot more outreach so that people understand that this is available going forward, which is going to be flyers through Peach Jar, flyers through our programs that we have now, and social media posts, really working hard to get the word out.
Do you work with the family resource specialists at the schools, or is that the Mesa Public Schools would channel that information down through the family resource specialists?
I'm not sure. Let's see. Amy Manis is here. She's our recreation administrator.
The family resource specialists are really who have the heartbeat of the school and the families in need, and so that's why I was asking that specifically.
Good morning, Mayor and Councilman. Yes, we are going to be using the MPS Marketing and Communications, and they are connected with the Family Resource professionals that are in each school. We also understand that there are a lot of students in Mesa that don't necessarily go to Mesa Public Schools. So we're doing a lot of additional outreach to get the word out to homeschools, charter schools, and other areas where we might find youth. So definitely Family Resources, a great connection, and we have really good communication liaisons with Mesa Public Schools as well that we will be connecting with them for sure.
Wonderful. These programs are just so important right now for these kids, especially with everything going on and the way school has been and extracurricular activities and all the things. So I think it's really, I love all those efforts being made to make sure we get the kids that need it into these programs.
Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Andrea. Amy as well. I know in the past you worked with the Mesa Education Center to make sure that every student is aware of these programs. Are you going to continue working with them?
Absolutely, yes.
Because that's probably the best vehicle to get this communication out, as well as the family, the liaisons at the schools. Are there any other programs besides the Recreation Center, the arts and culture? Are there?
Yes. Mayor, Councilor Luna, we're presenting the parks today. Arts and culture with the museums will be, and the Arts Center will be coming back about how we're going to help facilitate the school district to be able to bring classes and programs to our facilities, as we'll help underwrite that cost.
Great.
So yeah, that's a future presentation we're going to bring to you.
Well, thank you for your hard work. We appreciate what you're doing for our kids. As Councilmember Spilsbury mentioned, that this is a great outlet, and this will provide that avenue for kids to become active in our community. So thank you. Wise spent on good dollars spent on good activities. So thank you.
Remind me, it seems like there's more of a universal subsidy during COVID for some of these programs that wasn't needs-based. Am I remembering that incorrectly? Over the last couple of years, has there been well, Mesa Public Schools made a contribution to the city, and then so it was just a blanket, if you're an MPS kid, here's your tuition, as opposed to somebody else, right?
Correct, Mayor. That was through Mesa Public Schools.
Yeah.
And so somebody had to be a student with the school district in order to qualify for that one.
So
And
that
we've always
program's
had
going
fee
away.
assistant. We've always had, yeah, correct. The Mesa Public Schools scholarship, this replaces that.
Yeah.
And then we've always had fee assistance available. So if somebody was in a hardship situation, that second way of qualifying by providing documentation to us that they're in receipt of some sort of public assistance, that has always been there and available to help reduce the fees to participate in the programs. Making waves has always been available for swim lessons to make that very affordable for families.
That's great. Tell me about free and reduced lunch now, because it seems like, the food services at MPS is, again, because of COVID dollars, they no longer say, wait a minute, this kid's on the list, that kid's not. It's just, we don't take money, come and eat, right? And so is that what was that, Julie?
It's pizza every single day.
There you go. You get a piece of pizza every day. So it seems like maybe kids or families might be less, is that still a program that we can cite to as saying, oh, you pre-qualified because you're on the free and reduced lunch list, or is there even a free and reduced lunch list anymore?
Mayor, the school district is making all lunches free to all students this year again. They did that last year as well.
Yeah.
But the Title I schools are still really encouraging their families to fill out the same paperwork, because that is what qualifies Title I funding to those schools. And so there are still ways where families are filling that out, and we're able to see that documentation as needed. And in many cases, those families have some sort of public assistance that may be outside of the school district, that they would still provide documentation to us to qualify for that.
That's great. And the reason I ask is just because I think all of us want to make sure we utilize this money 100%, right? And so are the things in place to make it easy, to access these funds?
We monitor that, Mayor.
Yeah.
Make sure it's being effective. So.
Yeah.
And when we meet with the school board, we can, challenge them to help us figure out to do that too.
Great. Julie?
So on the updated ARPA chart, is this program represented where it says education and enrichment scholarships, or the recreational programming for K through 6, or both?
Mayor, council member, it's the K through 6 line on there, but
Okay.
we're saying it's all youth, not just capping it at 6th grade.
Oh, okay. So then the other line that says education and enrichment scholarships, that's not this? You're not looking at the chart in front of, that I'm looking at, but that's the
That's one
arts and
that's
culture one.
coming.
Okay. So this is the .44 or .447 million is
Correct.
this one? Okay.
Some of those titles are written so that they're consistent with the way the federal guidelines describe them,
okay.
so they maybe not as intuitive for us, but that's why they're there.
Okay, because the word scholarship was on here, and so I was just
Yeah.
trying to figure that out. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Council, other questions on this agenda item? Thank you very much. Appreciate your hard work to make these programs available to everyone in our community. Next item is item 2C. This is a presentation to provide direction on the proposed development of property generally located at North Power Road between East Hobart Street and East Halifax Drive. That is the subject of zoning case 278, including potential provisions of a development agreement pertaining to the operation of food trucks on the property. What is our staff going to do when this zoning case is over? I mean, we're going to have to lay everybody off, I guess, right? Okay.
Mayor, Council, good morning. Nana Apia with Development Services. I do have Rachel, who is Assistant Planning Director, and Sarah from the City Attorney's Office here with me this morning. So with this presentation, what we plan to do is to provide you a little bit of history of activities or proposed activities of entitlement that has taken place over the years, and also go into the current rezoning case that is scheduled before you on Monday, and also discuss associated development agreement that really lays out major part of the mitigation factors that we will be considering as part of the case. So you're looking at a site highlighted here is 6.13 acres. And the rezoning case is to rezone the site from office commercial and residential suburban 35 to neighborhood commercial. And the main reason or the goal for the rezoning is to allow a development that includes food truck uses on the property. So just to give you a little bit of background, I'm not sure if it's a little, but there's been extensive activities on the site. This started back in 2007 when the property was rezoned from RS35 to office commercial. Back in 2015, the property owners requested to basically rezone the property from the OC to infill district to allow self-storage facility on the property. However, this case was considered or heard by the Planning and Zoning Board and was continued to a future date, which never came back because there was strong neighborhood opposition to the use. And then back in 2018, the same request was reconsidered, again by the Planning and Zoning Board, and it was again continued because of neighborhood opposition of allowing such use on the property. So in 2019, I had a discussion before actually my discussion with the property owners or their representative. There had been several conversations with the previous staff to allow food truck uses on the property. And in my discussion with the applicant or the property owner's representative, food trucks, which currently we don't have it specifically defined in our zoning code, but we have the authority to basically interpret it based on similar uses, and the interpretation was food truck falls under the definition of limited restaurant uses, which could only be allowed on the property if it's associated with a public park, which public parks were allowed or are allowed in the OC district. So based on that discussion, the applicant's representative provided us a site plan that shows development of a park with a couple of areas shown for food trucks, which was consistent with the definition of food trucks that is allowed as part of a public park. And as a follow-up, the representative submitted a building permit to the building division back in December 2019. So nothing really occurred. We reviewed it and provided comments to the applicant, but nothing occurred on the site. The improvements, they didn't receive or pursue the permit to obtain final approval. So back in December 2020, staff was informed by neighbors and other publications that we saw online that there was a planned food truck event. So through that, we contacted the representative and then also met with the applicants on the site and discussed all what was required for the property to be used for food truck uses. And there were several directions that staff provided to them as to improvement on the site and other things that were required. Unfortunately, that was not really pursued. And then back in December, right after that, the activity was actually conducted and it continued. So staff started receiving complaints from the neighbors of the uses and the required permits for it. So back in May 2001, I basically issued an interpretation, and that interpretation was as a result of a request by the Development Services Director at that time, and also from the neighbors as to what is really the use on the property and whether it falls under the requirement of the zoning ordinance. So based on that interpretation, I determined that the use currently on the property, predominantly for food trucks, did not fall under the definition of public parks, which allowed food truck as an accessory and not predominantly the primary use on the property. So based on that interpretation, the applicant appealed, or the property owner appealed that interpretation. And that interpretation was considered by the Zoning Board of Adjustment, or the Board of Adjustment, back in October 2021. And the Board of Adjustment upheld my interpretation that the predominant activities on the site, which is food trucks, does not make the uses on the property or the activities on the property primarily as a public park. So while this discussion of the interpretation, the uses was going on, we had also advised the property owners to actually apply for zoning case, to really go through the zoning process for us to review all the potential impacts and address all the impacts that are possible to be addressed on the property. So whilst we were talking about the interpretation, we're also discussing the zoning issues with them. So in May of 2021, and as you can see, some of these dates overlap because there were several conversations going on at the same time. The applicant finally submitted the application to rezone the property from office commercial to neighborhood residential 35. From office commercial residential 35 to neighborhood commercial. And the intent was that zoning district will allow food truck uses or limited restaurant uses on the property. So with that, in October last year, the Planning and Zoning Board reviewed the rezoning request and recommended approval to you with a vote of 4-3. So after the Planning and Zoning Board, as you know, there was extensive discussion at the Planning and Zoning Board. And while the discussion with the P&Z were going on, or even after the P&Z decision, we were also meeting with the neighbors to really talk to them about potential impacts that could be addressed. We were also continuing to meet with the property owner as well. And one of the key parts which we're going to focus on in this presentation is we were discussing with them the possibility of adopting a development agreement to really address all the potential impacts, or majority of the potential impacts that the neighbors have been complaining about, that we staff believe that if they were put in place, we'll be able to make the property or the uses compatible to the neighborhood. And I'm going to go through all the major points in the DA, but as you know, we're still continuing that discussion of the development agreement. So this is the site plan that currently will be considered by you. On this site plan, you see there is a location of food trucks, which is also addressing the development agreement, restricted areas, and parking, and all the other standards. But and there is also a request to build a wall around the development, which is also addressing the DA that I will go over. So now with the development agreement, the main intent, as you know, is really mitigate the impacts. And we had to use a development agreement because the code requires us that whenever there is a development, restrictions on a development, we have to utilize a development agreement as a tool to really address those things. The zoning addresses part of it, but the DA is the main tool for that. So with a development agreement, we are discussing hours of operation on the site. We are also discussing traffic management and a traffic control plan, noise mitigation on the site, photometric plan to show location of light on the property. We are also discussing prohibited uses on the property because we believe certain uses will not be compatible even though they're allowed in the neighborhood commercial zoning district. And all the other required improvement, and also it's very critical to talk about the timing of improvement because we don't want those improvements to really lie idle or not to be pursued while the activities continues on the site. And then there is also a discussion about good neighbor policy that I think you guys continue to hear that from me a lot. So with the hours of operation, we do have specific hours of operation. Example, from on Fridays and Saturdays, the hours of operation are from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then there is a 1 hour lapse after the operation ends for the operators to actually park their property and move off the site. And then with the traffic management, there are several things. As you know, there's been several complaints from the neighboring property owners of people driving into the community and all that. So some of the mechanism to really mitigate those potential is to have people directing traffic. We are requesting Mesa Police to be part of it. We are also requesting the applicant to have attendants to really direct traffic. And we've reviewed this with actually our transportation department as well. So there's been several city departments that have been part of this discussion. And also one of the requirements is to make sure that there is a specific direction as to turning into the property and backing out, because that will help mitigate or minimize the number of times people drive through the neighborhood as well. And then also require specific signage to really direct where parking people should park, how they get in and out of the site. And then in the development agreement, we also do have noise mitigation measures. So location of speakers on the property, distance of the speakers away from the residential homes as well, limitation on how they can be designed as well. We've talked to several departments who are more familiar and have expert knowledge on the sound mitigation systems or measures. So we've gotten advice from those staff as well. And then location of light fixtures to make sure that they are not shining onto the adjacent properties. That has been some of the concerns or complaints from the neighboring property owners. And we also do have prohibited uses that we believe that because of the location of the property adjacent to residential neighborhood, certain uses that may be typically allowed in a neighborhood commercial in another location will not be compatible at this location. So we are recommending those uses to be prohibited on the property. We are still in discussion with the applicant. My understanding and from few of the discussions that I was part of in the past year was they have few concerns, but we hope that hopefully we can come to some agreement to require certain level of review if we allow some of those uses. So it won't be allowed by right, but it will go through some form of public hearing process.
I'm sorry, Nana, before you move off that slide, I know we've been encouraging the applicant and the neighbors to work together to come up with, to negotiate a good neighbor policy, and that hasn't happened to this point.
Mayor Council, there's been, we met with the applicant a couple of weeks ago, and there's been contact, but there's not, my understanding is there's not been a final agreement on the good neighbor policy. My conversation with the neighbors, there are several concerns they had that are being addressed in the development agreement. So example, the noise, the light system and all that, but once we finish the development agreement, that will be available to them to consider. But I know there's still ongoing discussion with the applicant and the neighbors, but there's not been a final resolution.
So the slide that is in front of us now, to me, this looks like a lot of the topics that I think would be discussed in a good neighbor policy. And so are these proposed additions to the development agreement essentially us creating the terms of a good neighbor policy?
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, and I think that, yes, and then I think the good neighbor policy would would provide almost a call list and contact information that wouldn't necessarily be in our development agreement, but if the neighbors have complaints or concerns, good neighbor policy would help identify some of those things. I don't know what other, there's a list here, but you can see that many of these are already being addressed now in the development agreement. So
That's my question. If the parties on their own don't come up with a good neighbor policy, can we bake one into the zoning case?
Essentially, that's what we're doing there.
Right, and is that, and have we gotten a reaction from the two sides saying, not so fast, we're going to withdraw our application because we can't tolerate the terms of your proposed development agreement, or?
Mayor, Council, with the development agreement, we staff believe that it will mitigate a potential impact, so that can actually move forward without a good neighbor policy. The advantage, as Mr. Brady said, with a good neighbor policy is it gives the direct contact. So example, if somebody have an immediate issue on the site, instead of waiting to call code enforcement or other city departments, there is a contact person that they can directly contact as well. And if there is a emerging issue, one of the things about the good neighbor policies is if there is an emerging issue, we don't want to wait to go through another public hearing process to be able to fix it. But with a good neighbor policy, one of the requirements is for it to be reviewed annually with the neighbors. And so as they continue to review it, they will be able to incorporate certain things that we may not have captured or foreseen.
Can you explain to me the enforceability of a good neighbor policy? Is it just simply goodwill and there's no enforcement attached to it, or?
So Mayor and Council, I think that ultimately ends up between what happens to be drafted, right? And so we've talked about that with both some of the neighbors briefly, but also with the property owners, and the ability to have, while generally good neighbor policies may be written more loosely, and that might be a more significant issue. We've told the neighbors and also the property owner that they might want to consider that this good neighbor policy is written with a specific performance type of remedy. But that's also why, we have the development agreement. The development agreement is so that council can feel comfortable, if council chooses to approve this, that there are mitigation measures in place that are enforceable, right? And so the good neighbor policy is usually sort of the tail end of that, right? And it's the ability for the neighbors to have a relationship with the property owner. And so, and that's why you'll see there's a lot of overlap between them, because we're not going to rely upon the good neighbor policy to be the means for the city to be able to enforce what the council believes is necessary for mitigating the impacts.
Thank you. Ms. Pillsbury, Mr. Thompson.
So the development agreement has to be finalized before the zoning case would go through. Is that correct?
It's our recommendation to the council that the development agreement go at the same time as the second reading of the zoning ordinance, which would be February 7th. That you would approve those on the same night together.
And so the development agreement would be completely fleshed out at that point. We would see exactly what is on the development agreement.
Be careful with that.
Okay.
I think what we are in conversations with the developer and taking input from the residents. We are under the hope and expectation that we will have an agreed upon development agreement by that date. If not, the staff may just come to council and recommend a development agreement. If the developer doesn't sign it, then obviously we would recommend against the zoning case.
Okay, so the development agreement needs to be approved by the developers. It's not something the city just says this is what it is.
No, absent their agreement, it's not effective. But then we would recommend against the zoning case.
And then on this time frame for construction, so we can put some time limitations on, like, you need to have the wall done by next month, or, I mean, we can put limitations like that on it.
Mayor, Council, yes, it's in the development agreement with the timing of it, and there is also a little bit of margin for adjustment because we all know the issues we're facing with construction and all that.
Because I think that will make the biggest factor is once that wall goes up and all the improvements happen, a lot of these complaints will go away, is what I think. Okay.
A couple things. So on the development agreement, can you phase it so that they can continue to operate while they're making the improvements? Is that kind of how you're doing this with the DA? And also, is there a reason why we don't want to take the good neighbor policy and put that into the development agreement so it transfers into perpetuity with the property?
I can start, John. Mayor, council members, so one of the conditions of the zoning case is for them to create a good neighbor policy. So it's a condition with a rezoning case. The same as in the development agreement, it requires them to have the good neighbor policy. So in a way, it's already incorporated into that. With the timing also of construction, that's one of the things we're still working through with that.
And so we might include, if they were to have the good neighbor policy done, we would probably include it as an exhibit, but we'd probably give them flexibility also because the neighbors, as things might happen over the years, they might want to modify it. So we don't want to prevent them from that possibility. And we are looking at how to sort of the duality of sort of phasing and as long as you meet certain deadlines, you know, you sort of continue through like we do on other developments. And if you don't, then you have to look at how do you handle that.
Well, and I like the idea of, you know, putting the good neighbor policy into the DA or reference it as an exhibit. I know things will change over the years, but being able to tie a good neighbor policy to the property itself, in the event that in 2 or 3 years down the road, the property owner sells, somebody else comes in, they have to abide by those same good neighbor policies. And I think that putting that into the development agreement helps do that, right? Because the DA stays with the property.
It's a condition of the zoning today, and it sounds like, have we included it as a stipulation in the development agreement? Was it mentioned in the development agreement?
We can include it as an exhibit, and I think where you're also going with this is because the development agreement's recorded on the property, then any potential purchaser gets notice of the fact of what the good neighbor policy is and what they're gonna have to be bound by, and so that is a good idea. Thank you.
Julie.
So I know the mayor asked specifically about the enforcement of the good neighbor policy, but what does the enforcement of the development agreement look like?
That's where code compliance.
Code compliance.
would come out and determine whether or not they were in violation of the development agreement. If their failure to meet those obligations would issue citations.
And there's multiple sort of different ways we've looked at this on this particular development agreement, which is similar to other development agreements. And one of the biggest one is specific performance. In other words, you have to comply with the obligation. And we could enforce that in a couple different ways, we think. One is sort of code compliance, and then the other is sort of the traditional contract process and, you know, filing a lawsuit and saying, and going to a court and getting an order saying you have to comply with these obligations. And that's, so when attorneys use specific performance, that's what they're talking about.
Okay.
Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Nana, for the presentation. So just to reiterate, the development agreement will include as an addendum, if you will, an attachment, the good neighbor policy. But there still hasn't been an agreement between the residents and the property owner. Is that correct? You're still working through that. Is that correct?
For the good neighbor policy or the development agreement?
Both.
So, correct.
There's a draft of a good neighbor policy. We can't say that both sides have agreed to it.
Okay.
So again, it may come down to the council, we may present to you. We're trying to get to a goal where we can have a development agreement that is signed, will be signed by the developer, and we're trying to get to a point where at least we have a good neighbor policy. I think that's going to be difficult to see whether or not, you know, who signs the good neighbor policy, which neighbor signs it, because there may be a split there too. So we'll have to figure out what that looks like. We may have a good neighbor policy that we've just drafted that we think is in the best interest of both sides. But we definitely have to have on the development agreement, we have to have concurrence from the developer, obviously. And if we don't, then the staff will recommend against the zoning case.
So it wouldn't be unilateral per se, would it? In terms of, okay, the developer says, oh, they're going to do all of this. how do the residents weigh in on this? And will they weigh in on February 7th? Is that when they come in as for?
Well, one of the reasons we put this we want to get this development agreement out today.
Okay.
And wait until you get the second reading of the ordinances so that it's out there for a period of time. So I think we've met with the developer.
And I think not the development agreement to get it out there today, but the deal points, so that the
Yeah.
neighbors know the structure.
We won't have the
and so
legal
that they know.
document, but they'll see what the items we're trying to address. And we'd love to see the feedback. If there's a topic here that we've missed, or if there's something that we've missed, we'd love to hear.
Is there a drop that day that they have to, the developer has to agree on, or the city?
So
is that
timing, if we're
February
going to bring this
1st
to
or-
the council February 7th,
That's correct.
then you would get the packet on the Tuesday before that. So the 5th would be the deadline that it would have to be ready to go to council. So it needs to be done the week before that. So it's the first days of February. The 1st of February, it has to be done. So.
Are the neighbors working as a group or just different neighbors, residents? I don't, maybe you know.
Yeah,
Mayor,
they're working, I'm sorry, they're working as a group.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when I've met with them, when I've talked to them, there's a large representation from that neighborhood. I've gotten very few emails that live there that want this. Most of them.
That actually live in that neighborhood.
That live in the
adjacent.
neighborhoods, yeah, because the impact it's had has been overwhelming, it's been tremendous.
I just didn't know if they were working functioning as a group or just a bunch of, because I'm getting all the emails, but from individuals, so I didn't know if they had like a lawyer representing them as a group or a spokesperson.
Mayor, Councilmember Salisbury, there's been few leaders that we've been communicating, and from my understanding from them, they are coordinating with the neighborhood group. So.
That would help.
Thank you.
Is it, on the development agreement, is it the ultimate penalty, could we shut the activities down? I know code compliance sometimes takes months as far as a process, but is that a potential that operations could be shut down if that's not, if they don't comply with traffic management or lighting or building the wall, things that are in the agreement, is that a potential as far as the ramifications that not complying into the DA?
Yeah, and I think it depends on so there'll be two avenues, I think. One is through code compliance in that process, and there's initially fines involved in that process, but then it wraps up as you get more violations per year, then the seriousness becomes more serious, and then ultimately, I think after 3 violations within a year, it actually goes, I think it goes criminal actually at that point, but I could be wrong, or maybe it's 4. On violations under the zoning code. And then there's also the contract violation, and where you could go to Superior Court and get a specific order that you have to comply. And if you don't comply with that, then you're going to be back before the court regarding the fact that you didn't comply with a specific court order. And then at that point, the court would be able to consider everything.
But the issue, they would still be able to operate during that time, right?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As the process keeps going.
Yeah, I don't know if we haven't introduced, I don't think we haven't, Sarah, maybe you can, we haven't introduced the concept that we just, you just shut down for a particular violation. Because many realize some of these violations might be,
Okay, Monday.
Sure.
They're not the type of violation that would warrant a shutdown, right? A misplaced speaker or something of that nature. And so there has to be sort of proportionality of the consequence. And so, but ultimately, I think the answer is yes, it's possible.
Yeah. Okay.
They're currently operating, as I'm aware, and the Board of Adjustments agree with Nana's interpretation that this is in violation of city, of your policy. That's correct?
Mayor, Councilmember, the Board of Adjustment decision was that the predominant activities on the site as food trucks does not conform to the definition of public park and recreational activity. So that was really the interpretation from the Board of Adjustment.
So the question is, why are they allowed to continue to operate today? What the answer is, what? They appealed their case.
So how long will it?
So we
go?
put on a stay for us, we can't enforce until they go through their appeal?
It's a little more nuanced than that, and so they're going through this other, obviously, the rezoning process with the site plan, and as you remember, council changed the city code in Title V, not the zoning code, the business code, licensing code, just last month, and that ordinance kicks in
March 1st?
March 1st, and so, you know, the timing here of trying to get to the first meeting in February is intentional as far as compliance with that March 1st date. And so, you know, March 1st, there's a 250-foot restriction next to residential neighborhoods unless you have an approved site plan, which is what this zoning case is. And so, it's not a perpetual concept. There is sort of, we do have a ticking clock now.
So if we don't get an agreement on the zoning case before March 1st, then the new ordinance takes effect. And without the site plan, 250 feet doesn't work with what they're doing today. So then we would be able to go, and we would then be, it would be to the food truck operators is how we would be enforcing it, not the park owners, but the food truck operators would be then out of compliance with the license.
So then would we have the code officer go and issue?
Contact with all the
food truck operators that they're in violation?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
So at that point of they're not in compliance with the ordinance, the food truck ordinance, of the spacing and such, we can shut it down, or would it continue because it's in litigation?
No, at that point, we would have now that council's given us that ordinance, we would then have the authority to go in and cite the food trucks. I guess it's almost a license citation or a license revocation, I guess.
I'm sure we would first educate them.
We would educate
We'd
them.
first educate them, right?
So you can't be
because
here.
These are the food trucks that are all operating on them.
Yeah,
And then,
they wouldn't know.
and so we'd let them know first before we just go directly to citation. But, so yeah, it would be the food trucks.
We are spending a lot of time on the DA and neighborhood policy, and I appreciate that. But I think, for me, the bigger question is if the zoning is appropriate for the use, the highest and best use of the property to serve the area, including the neighborhood. So I think we have to get past that decision, or not past that decision, but that being a primary consideration before we get into the DA and the good neighbor policy. So I don't want anybody to think we're making the assumption that the zoning is going to pass and that we're focusing on DA and good neighbor policy. I think that has to be to the forefront, that that's still in question. And then I did have one question on the site plan here. Where do the food trucks on this new site plan?
Is it the blue? Where was that?
Go to the colored one.
Yeah, I think it was right up against the street.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen
Up
one
against the
with
street.
food trucks, but they're not on this.
There's a
map.
green belt between them and the.
So 13, is that help?
It's easier to see it with the previous slide that has a rendering with color.
Slide
There you
13
go.
help?
The food
Well,
trucks
no,
aren't on the map.
there you go.
Yeah.
So those blue areas?
No.
No,
This is,
between the blue areas?
Below,
Okay.
yeah.
And how many food trucks, does that also include the, I guess this would lay out to the east side, above where the blue is? Is it just
No.
one side?
That's Power Road.
Mayor, council, so there is a restriction as to the location of the food trucks. So this is the area that they can only locate the food trucks. They cannot go beyond this area.
Okay, and how many food trucks approximately would that accommodate?
The Mayor, council, the number of food trucks is based on the number of parking spaces. So based on the number of parking spaces, approximately, I think the highest is 20. But the number is absolutely determined by the number of parking spaces. So they won't be able to exceed if they don't provide parking for them.
And is that more or less than what's operating on a typical night, do we know?
More.
It's more,
They have much less than 20 every night.
okay.
But they're going to have more parking under
They'll have a
this
lot more parking.
than they do
So
today.
It's going to be more intense in that area as far as activity than it is now. Although I realize with the site plan and the building the walls is supposed to mitigate any of those impacts to the neighborhood, but as far as the amount of people and.
I don't know that they are like gonna push it to 20 every night just because they have this. Like that would just be the max based on the parking, but I would say currently they usually have around 12 or something would be, I follow their Instagram, so I see like how many trucks are there each night.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think that just because this goes through, they're gonna push it to 20 every single night. I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Yeah, Mayor Council, several of the issues is now there's going to be a wall. Currently, there's no wall. That alone really helps solve or mitigate potential impacts that are existing out there. The location of lights and parking, orientation of the site, direction of traffic, those are all the things that currently doesn't really exist. So those will all help mitigate impacts on the site.
And at their current operations, is there any limit? I mean, are approximately 12 food trucks are operating? Is that because they're some kind of limitation that we place or because of the current parking situation? Or that's just, it's very unregulated right now, right?
That's right, correct.
Okay, all right, so it's just what shows up and what
Because as far as we're concerned right now, under the current conditions, it's a non-conforming use, right? It shouldn't be there, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
so,
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. In the interest of time, I mean, we've got 2 more hearings on this topic, so there will be no shortage of opportunities to ask these questions and get to the bottom. But as has been mentioned, we've had a lot of email. I know there's a lot of people in the neighborhood and outside the neighborhood that are interested in this. So just to make it crystal clear for everyone, some of the emails I've seen have asked about the history as to how did we get to where we are. So I would refer the first part of this presentation to anyone who has those questions. I think Nana did a good job of rehearsing how we got here. And this will be introduced on January the 10th. I suspect it's on the consent agenda now, but if neighbors or someone else comes and wants to have talk about it, we'll take it off the consent agenda, and we'll do that on January 10th. And then February the 7th is the proposed hearing date for another discussion, and that's when a vote will occur.
Mayor, we will not have the development agreement it doesn't show up until the February date. So
Got it.
that's why we want to come to council now, and so just make that clear.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Moving on, the next agenda item that we have is item 3. That's to acknowledge receipt of various minutes. Mr. Freeman, are you making a motion? I am. Thank you very much. And seconded by Mr. Luna. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. Next item is meetings and conferences attended. Council members, anything you'd like to share with us from your long break? Mr. Luna?
Real quick, I want to thank Antonia. Where's Antonia?
She's there.
Antonia, thank you for working with Mesa Police Association, Mesa Bomberos, and Mesa Fire on that wonderful event that we had at Jefferson Elementary School. I was joining with Councilmember Spilberry. She did a tremendous job. We gave a lot of gifts away. The helicopter with Blue Santa landed. The kids were extremely happy, and I think we made. And we also gave some 20 bicycles. The Bomberos gave 20 bicycles, so it was a great event. Also had a meeting with Senator Kelly on behalf of ECHO, Hispanics enjoying camping, hunting on the outdoors, and that was a very fruitful meeting. And also participated in a reading session at Sousa Elementary School, and it was a pleasure to read for the kids.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Council, other comments? Vice Mayor.
I'll go ahead and just cover a few highlights over the past month. Last month, in just mid-December, we celebrated the groundbreaking of the Art District Lofts. That's Old Brown and Brown in downtown Mesa, and it'll be residents and some live work, some retail as well. So that was exciting. Some of us on council, a lot of us served at Plaza de Cristo a few days before Christmas and serving a meal. It's actually Taco Tuesday. It was fun and a great way to serve our community. And then we also participated, I think it was the next day, on the United Food Bank distribution at the convention center and getting meals to those in need. And do you want to talk about the firefighter graduation?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And also, I think it was that same day, we also, many of us all attended the Mesa Fire and Medical Firefighter graduation at the Mesa Arts Center, the class number 21-2, a great group. I'm very proud of them, and I want to say congratulations on your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Ms. Pillsbury?
I won't add anything more other than just that I want to thank all the volunteers that are out there, especially at Christmas time, that are just doing so much. So at all of the different things we went and volunteered at, there was so many people there that are just happy and positive and doing good things. And I loved participating in those and wanted to thank all the volunteers that were part of those.
Thank you. And to that end, I think we had a very successful ice rink event this year. The new rink is spectacular, and thank you to the Chamber and Downtown Mesa Association and everyone else involved in the Merry Main Street activities this holiday season. I'm really looking forward to next year when the temple lights are back and when the park with the screen is up and running, and I think it's really going to be the place to be for the holidays next year. But folks did a great job this year, and thanks to everyone who made that happen. Any other comments from council? If not, Mr. Brady, what does our schedule of future meetings look like?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, we'll have our first council meeting of the year on Monday, January 10th. Preceding that, there will be at 4 p.m., there will be a Community Cultural Development Committee meeting, and then we'll have our study session council meeting. And just as I mentioned earlier this morning, February 10th, we'll be having our joint Mesa Public Schools Board and City Council meeting. It'll be at the Mesa Public Schools Administration Building. We'll get you more information on that. It's a Thursday morning, so it'll still start at 7:30, and we'll get you the address for that and the agenda. And then again, just a reminder, we've set aside March 3rd is our City Council Strategic Planning meeting. That will be over at the newly renovated studios, and so we'll be over there in the morning for that. So thank you.
That'll be exciting to be in that building.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we do have an additional agenda item. Item 6 is to convene an executive session on the pending litigation case of Sandoval versus the City of Mesa et al. Is there a motion to go into an executive session? Thank you, Mr. Luna, seconded by Ms. Pillsbury. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We will go into an executive session.